These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Pata Seca, born in Angola in 1830, was taken to Brazil where his great height and strength made him a living legend on a remote estate. The owner used him mainly to father children with many women on the land, and local records claim he became the ancestor of more than 200 people. In 19th century Alabama, some enslaved people were forced to wear this iron collar with a bell on top, so every move gave them away. The harsh design made escape almost impossible, turning the sound of a small bell into a tool of control. In 1905 in Mongolia, a bound man kneels in the snow as officials prepare to carry out the empire's harshest form of justice. The long curved blade and calm onlookers show how public punishments once doubled as cold lessons to the crowd. In March 1944, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius rained ash and fire onto the Pompeii airfield, wrecking rows of American B-25 Mitchell bombers without a single enemy shot. At least 78 aircraft were lost in one blow. In 1971, in the Bogside area of Londonderry, a young man stands tied to a pole, covered in tar and feathers after local people punished him for stealing. The crowd of children and neighbors watching in silence shows how public shame was used to keep order in this tense corner of Northern Ireland. On 11 December 1962, near the village of Ca Mau in South Vietnam, a crewman sprints from a smoking CH-21 Shawnee that has just crash-landed in the grass. 2 helicopters went down during the raid and were later destroyed by their own side so that no part of them could be taken. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Captain Takatsugu Jojima stands on the deck of the Japanese carrier Shokaku watching his air crews launch. Within hours, their planes would begin the surprise strike on Pearl Harbor that pulled the United States into World War II. On the set of the fantasy film Labyrinth in 1986, filmmakers built a huge vertical tunnel lined with more than 100 latex hands. Each hand was worked by puppeteers just off camera, so the wall seemed alive as it grabbed at the falling hero. In Persia, around 1890, officials carry out a traditional punishment called falak, where a prisoner's bound feet are lifted for strikes from a cane. Crowds sometimes gathered to watch these scenes, meant to humble the offender through pain and public shame. On December 16, 1960, wreckage from a mid-air collision between a Douglas DC-8 and a Lockheed Super Constellation rained down onto a busy Brooklyn street in New York City. The disaster took the lives of 134 people. In 1969 in the United States, a hidden television camera captured this daylight bank raid as a man vaulted over the counter while police officers stood only a few steps away. That year set a record for such bold bank attacks. On December 3, 1967 in Cape Town, surgeon Christian Barnard completed the first successful human-to-human heart transplant at Groote Schuur Hospital. The new heart came from 25-year-old Denise Darval and kept 55-year-old grocer Louis Washkansky alive for 18 days. In the early 1990s, members of Group A, an elite unit of the Committee for State Security, posed casually for a private snapshot with dark glasses and hidden gear. Behind their relaxed look, these men were trained for hostage storms and the most dangerous protection missions at the very end of the Soviet era. In 1942 in Bavaria, prisoners in striped uniforms line up for a thin meal after harsh stone quarry work in the prison camp of Flossenburg. The old castle on the hill looms over the scene like a silent witness to their hunger, forced labor, and strict control. On 21 August 1948 in Berlin, workers bend over cobblestones to paint the exact line that splits the Soviet zone from the British zone at Potsdamer Platz. What looks like a simple stripe of paint is really the first hard mark of the coming Cold War border through the city. In 1944 on the Karelian front, this young Soviet soldier stands in the forest wearing an SN-42 steel breastplate, scarred by 3 bullet hits. The dents show how this simple armor turned a close brush with death into bruises and a second chance at life. In 1987, in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, women confront armed soldiers in the street while one mother clutches her child. Moments like this became symbols of the First Intifada, when ordinary families stood face to face with patrols using only their voices and courage. Betty Page was the queen of 1950s pin-up pictures, a smiling icon in stockings whose face filled magazines around the world. After she left fame and turned to quiet faith, she struggled with serious mental health problems and spent years in care. In Rome in 1966, Yugoslav actress Sonia Romanoff presses her ice cream into the face of famous paparazzi photographer Rino Barilari after he chases her with his camera. He later said that during his wild career, more than 70 cameras were destroyed. In 1986, near Hayden Lake in Idaho, a man in a long pointed robe stands between a man with dogs and another in combat clothes on a quiet forest road. In 1952, during the First Indochina War, a French Foreign Legion officer wades through muddy water while talking on a heavy field radio carried by his local guide. The towering antenna and box on the man's back show how early mobile contact meant hauling a whole station through the swamp for a single report. During the Vietnam War, a South Vietnamese soldier questions two bound suspects in the flooded grasslands of the southern delta. Captured by photographer Horst Fias, the quiet standoff shows how moments of fear and doubt could decide a person's future in seconds. In 1946, survivors in Hiroshima bow their heads and pray toward the blast center on the first anniversary of the atomic attack. The lone, shattered building behind them stands like a scar in stone, marking where modern war changed the city in an instant. In 1944, in Antwerp, captured soldiers from the German garrison were briefly held in an empty zoo cage after surrendering the city. The strange scene of men sitting on straw where animals once lived showed how quickly power and pride could flip sides in war. In the 1860s, Isaac Sprague was billed in circus posters as the Skeleton Man, a real performer who stood 168 centimeters tall but weighed less than 20 kilograms. Despite his fragile body, he earned a living on stage, married, and raised 3 healthy children who said he was a gentle. This photograph is often said to show Mata Hari on her way to her death in France in 1917, dressed in deep black like a calm shadow. In 1906, at the Akatui penal prison in Siberia, a group of young revolutionary women posed together, including Maria Spiridonova, Alexandra Ismailovich, Maria Shkolnik, and others. Many of these calm faces would spend decades in cells. On March 27, 1968, the first human in space, Yuri Gagarin and his mentor, Vladimir Seryogin, died when their training jet went down in this Russian forest. The twisted wreckage became a guarded state secret for years, feeding rumors. On September 26, 1976, Soviet pilot Vladimir Serkov deliberately flew his An-2 plane into the entrance of a 5-story apartment block in Novosibirsk, where his former wife lived. He and 6 residents died in the blast. Thai Queen Sunanda Kumari Ratana sits in royal silk, unaware that at 19 she will lose her life in a simple riverboat accident with her young daughter. Dozens watched them fall into the water but did not touch the Queen, blocked by a strict law that forbade commoners from laying hands on royalty under threat of severe punishment. In June 1941, near Brest Fortress, senior nurse Praskovia Tkacheva sits with officers' wives and children on the ground while German soldiers close a ring around them. Tkacheva survived to work as a courier for local partisans, and decades later, the German soldier who took this picture returned it to the family of a Soviet officer. A new American recruit winces as a medic gives him a large vaccination shot during intake to military service. Mass shots like this were meant to keep crowded barracks from turning small infections into outbreaks that could weaken whole units. In the 1930s in Bergen, Norway, workers heave piles of obsolete typewriters off a truck and into the dump by the harbor. Each crashing machine marks the end of countless office stories, as the tools that once captured words are thrown away without a second glance. On 27 October 1934 in Sydney, an advertising car shaped like a giant roll of Peppo Mint Lifesavers candy cruises down the street for photographer Sam Hood. The rolling mint tube turned a simple sweet into a moving spectacle long before anyone spoke about viral marketing. In the late 1880s, workers in the Ural region of the Russian Empire stand high on a forest of wooden scaffolds as they shape a new railway bridge. Structures like this stitch distant mines and towns to the rest of the empire, turning remote land into a main road of steel. In 1971, a rare amphicar rolls off the road and straight into the water to join the crowded start of the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. This German-made amphibious car could cruise on the highway and then motor across the harbor at about 7 knots without its driver ever leaving the seat. In 1917, this trench dog proudly lies beside a neat row of rats it has caught in the muddy lines of World War I. Such four-legged hunters were silent helpers, fighting disease and protecting sleeping soldiers more than any alarm bell could. In 1865, inside a Washington prison yard, 4 people convicted in the plot against President Abraham Lincoln stand on a scaffold while soldiers line the walls above. An assistant holds an umbrella over Mary Surratt to shield her from the fierce summer sun. In 1890, the flat land outside Baku bristled with wooden oil derricks, a strange forest of towers rising from mud and puddles. This early boom field helped turn the region into one of the world's first great oil capitals, decades before glass skyscrapers and pipelines arrived. In 1957 in Chicago, a well-dressed couple who had just moved into a mostly white area stand over a chalk message on their sidewalk pointing toward their home. The single word on the pavement shows how some neighbors tried to mark and isolate them instead of welcoming new residents. In 1960 in Norway, police officers crowd around one of the country's first roadside speed cameras, learning how to trap fast drivers with radar instead of a whistle and a stopwatch. The bulky device on a tripod looks like a small robot. In the 1970s, Uruguay was patrolled by its own army, with soldiers like these guarding trucks and city streets during harsh military rule. Foreign newspapers wrote that despite the guns and arrests, many citizens had lost their fear and marched in huge protests demanding the generals step down. In the 1970s in Oymyakon, one of the coldest lived-in places on Earth, a canteen worker leans from a window buried under meters of ice and snow. Here, winter is so fierce that even buildings grow frozen cliffs, and doors and windows must be carved open like tunnels. In 1935, a young woman poses with an outrageous multi-blade folding tool, a decorative copy of the gadget built by Franz Frenzel in the early 1900s. Packed with dozens of tiny implements, it turned the idea of a pocket helper into something closer to mechanical jewelry. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, pit bull-type dogs were so trusted with children that families posed them proudly in studio photos and even nicknamed them nanny dogs. These rare portraits show the breed's old reputation as a gentle guardian, long before modern fears changed the story. In March 1953 in Nevada, mannequins dressed like an ordinary American family sit quietly in folding chairs, waiting for an atomic test. After the flash, researchers would study their damaged clothes and scattered seats to measure what such a blast could do to a real town. In 1922 in the United States, this poised young woman demonstrates a secret thigh holster for a small pistol hidden under her dress. Fashion and personal protection met in designs like this, meant to let someone walk into a room looking elegant while quietly armed. In 1903 at Heidelberg University in Germany, students relax in a cramped dorm room while passing a long pipe as if it were part of an exotic ritual. At the time, some young Europeans flirted with imported Eastern-style smoking habits, chasing a hazy escape that felt worldly and daring. In late November 1942, Romanian soldiers captured by the Soviet Southwest Front huddle in the cold after their army was broken and surrounded. Around 30,000 men were taken from the shattered 3rd Romanian Army. During the First Intifada around 1987, Palestinian women stand in the street shouting and throwing stones while an Israeli soldier takes cover behind a wrecked car with his rifle raised. In 1988 on the West Bank, a masked Palestinian teenager sends a stone from a slingshot toward an Israeli military helicopter circling above the rooftops. The lone figure with a homemade weapon against a machine in the sky became a stark symbol of how uneven and emotional the street clashes of that time were. In 1935, in Germany, a farm advisor holds up a big chart of the Colorado potato beetle, while villagers crowd around to study the striped potato thief. Governments saw this tiny insect as such a danger to harvests that they launched public lessons like this one. In 1957, at the Nevada test site, staff placed pigs in sturdy metal containers to measure how an atomic test shock would affect living bodies. Nathaniel Morgan is shown lifting one animal back into the light after the explosion, proof that even practice for war dragged innocent creatures into the experiment. In 1958, office workers wade through knee-deep water on St. Mark's Square in Venice, holding their suitcases above the rising tide. Seasonal high water, later known worldwide as Acqua Alta, turned the famous piazza into an accidental canal. In August 1966 in Texas, fans gather around a fire to burn Beatles records after John Lennon made a remark that compared the band's fame to religion. The next day, lightning struck the local radio station that promoted the protest, destroying much of its gear. In August 1916, in the trenches of Champagne, a French infantryman fires his Liebel rifle using Alfred Bellier's strange mirror periscope frame so he can shoot without raising his head above the sandbags. Devices like this turned the front into a battlefield of clever gadgets. In 1959, at the opening of the tiny bar Chez J in Santa Monica, showgirls sip cocktails while a visiting circus elephant calmly reaches across the counter for peanuts. The surreal photo helped turn the seaside hangout into a local legend where almost anything seemed possible. In 1923, Adolf Hitler rides in a decorated open car during one of his early speaking tours in Germany. Scenes like this show how he used parades and staged photos to turn a small party into a rising threat. In 1984, members of a spiritual community held a brick-carrying contest, racing to move neat stacks of bricks up to 60 meters for a new road. This devotee, Kripamoya, calmly hugs a tower weighing about 55 kilograms, roughly as much as his own body. In 1917, near Messines in Belgium, engineers built this steel observation post disguised as a shattered tree stump and quietly swapped it with a real tree under cover of night. From its tiny slits, scouts watched enemy lines only meters away, turning a dead trunk into one of the strangest lookout towers of World War I. During the Tour de France in 1930, French writer Jules Merviel calmly drinks wine while pedaling hard along the road. At that time, many cyclists believed a bottle of red gave strength and courage, so it was carried like secret fuel in the race. In 1963, on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, a trader thrusts his ticket into the air as prices for oil companies climb. Before computers and screens, fortunes rose and fell in this loud circle of men, shouting numbers and waving slips of paper. Around 1918, a Coptic Christian woman in Egypt poses in a full-face veil and long cloak, clothing more often linked in modern minds with other faiths. Her outfit reflects an older fashion shared by upper-class women under Ottoman influence. On 20 July 1944, senior officers inspect the wrecked conference hut at the Wolf's Lair after a hidden bomb almost killed Adolf Hitler during a meeting. The smashed table and torn ceiling show how close the blast came to changing the course of the war in a single afternoon. Around 1920 in Panama, some prisoners were kept in rope cages hung over a cliff, swinging high above the ground like human cargo. Food and messages had to be lowered by rope, so every creak of the net reminded them that one mistake could send them into the void. In 1944, Belgian women accused of helping the occupiers sit on straw inside an empty zoo cage in Antwerp as people passed by outside. The strange choice of holding place flipped the roles of spectacle and viewer, turning former allies of the regime into a public display. In the 18th century, some cemeteries used iron mort safes like this to lock a grave under a heavy metal cage. They were built to stop body snatchers from digging up fresh burials and selling the remains to medical schools for study. In 1939, workers at Tres Zapotes in Mexico uncovered this giant Olmec stone head staring up from the earth like a buried titan. Carved over 2,000 years ago from a single massive boulder, these heads still puzzle experts who debate which rulers they show. In 1931 in Berlin, engineers and businessmen watch a log being sliced into neat discs by one of the earliest steel gasoline chainsaws. Just a few years earlier, felling a single tree could take hours with handsaws. Now a noisy metal box and a chain of teeth were about to change forests. After a Rolling Stones concert in Warsaw in 1967, the hall floor was left buried under broken folding chairs and dropped banners. After a daring robbery of the state treasury carriage, a horse lies collapsed in the street, while police and bystanders stare in shock. St. Petersburg, 1906. The quiet cobbled bridge became an instant crime scene that showed how unsafe even the Tsar's money could be. A Soviet MBR-2 flying boat with its raised engine and nose machine gun turret patrols a lonely stretch of coastline, early 1930s. This strange seaplane could skim low over the water, land on the sea itself, and quietly watch ships and harbors from just above the waves. During his 1960 visit to France, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev is jokingly presented with a bouquet made of corn in honor of his famous corn campaign. The crowd laughs as he reaches for the stalks, turning propaganda about feeding the nation into a light public tease. During the 1940s, nylon shortages made real stockings rare, so women shaved their legs and painted stocking seams directly onto their skin. This clever rationing trick quietly helped turn smooth, bare legs into a global beauty standard. Russian Imperial Navy submarine Leopard lies entombed in ice beside warships in the harbor of Revel, now Tallinn, February 1918. Sailors spray seawater and hack at the frozen coating so the boat can move again in the last winter of the Empire. A teenage girl drops to her knees screaming as Elvis Presley steps on stage in the United States in the mid-1950s. To worried adults, it looked like mass hysteria, but to his fans, it felt like the whole world suddenly turning upside down. Russian prisoners of war are suspended by ropes as punishment in an Austro-Hungarian camp during World War I. The guards casually pose for the camera, turning their pain into a macabre spectacle. A Kamaz truck sits beside the massive hull of Soviet submarine K-84 in dry dock, making the big truck look tiny. This ballistic missile submarine is longer than a city block and as tall as a multi-story building when fully out of the water. 15 years after World War II, the old Schauspielhaus Theater in East Berlin still stands cracked and empty, surrounded by rubble and weeds. On this square, once filled with music and lights, only a silent shell remains to show how hard the city was hit. Roman soldiers retreating from a frontier fort in Scotland around AD 87 buried this mountain of 875,400 iron nails, so local Caledonian tribes couldn't reuse the precious metal. Centuries later, archaeologists uncovered the hoard, revealing over 8,700 hours of Roman blacksmiths' work thrown into the ground on purpose. Once one of South Vietnam's most powerful leaders, Nguyen Cao Ky, ended up running the register in a small liquor store in Los Angeles in 1977. His fall from the presidential palace to a strip mall job shows how completely Exile could rewrite a life. In 1853, this small crew formed the very first staff of Levi Strauss's new workwear company in San Francisco, stitching tough denim for gold rush laborers. None of them could have guessed their hard clothes would become the world's favorite casual uniform. A captured thief clings to a post while townsmen crowd around him in Guaymas, Mexico, 1920. He knows this dusty square is likely the last place he will ever see. Astrophysicist Carl Sagan holds an early drawing of the Pioneer plaque, a message meant for any beings who might find the spacecraft in deep space. A few years later, he helped create the Voyager Golden Record, a cosmic time capsule filled with Earth's sounds, images, and greetings. Engineers mount a 12-ton lead-lined crew capsule onto the experimental Convair NB-36H in the United States in the 1950s, built to test if a bomber could safely carry a working nuclear reactor. The plane completed 47 flights with the reactor on board before the project was abandoned in favor of safer mid-air refueling. Paris workers stand with white gag ribbons in their mouths during a May Day rally supporting the Russian Revolution. Paris, 1st May 1919. The odd muzzles symbolized how post-war authorities and employers were trying to silence workers' voices. Acrobats perform a synchronized air ballet routine, hanging upside down in perfect formation at an American fair in 1948. High above the ground, their calm smiles and identical costumes turn a dangerous circus stunt into a floating human chandelier. American airmen play an improvised volleyball match with Soviet soldiers in Poltava in 1944, with battle-scarred apartment blocks as their backdrop. For a brief hour, shuttle-bombing crews and Red Army hosts turned a frontline airbase into a noisy playground of teammates instead of allies on different fronts. A faded sign for a licensed opium shop draws a tight crowd of men in Lahore, Punjab, October 1978. Within a few years, such open sales would be banned in Pakistan, pushing this once public trade out of sight. German soldiers show off a captured Russian Maxim machine gun ingeniously packed on a single horse during World War I. Turning one animal into a mobile gun cart was both a logistical trick and a grim symbol of how industrial weapons reached even muddy village yards. French police officers point the way to German troops entering Paris, June 1940. Just days after their army collapsed, these men were already helping the new rulers navigate their own capital. Ainu elders sit around a bear laid out for a sacred sending-off ceremony in Hokkaido, 1905. They believed the animal spirit returned to the world of the gods, bearing gifts from the human village. An Austro-Hungarian artillery observer rides a crank-raised mechanical tower in a forest during World War I. This odd-wheeled machine let him see over the trees and direct guns while staying mostly hidden. An Afghan elder stands in the snow, holding a decorated British flintlock musket that long outlived the empire which brought it here. In remote valleys like this, antique weapons were treasured as family heirlooms well into the late 1960s. Asmat chief hunter Danny stands in the Papuan forest, later claiming he was responsible for the mysterious 1961 disappearance of Rockefeller heir Michael Rockefeller. His chilling story of spearing the young outsider and taking part in a secret ritual is still debated by historians today. In the deep forest, Old Believer hunters built this log kuluma trap to catch wandering bears. It looks like a rough shelter, but one step on the hidden trigger would send the heavy roof crashing down on whatever entered. The famous Akita dog Hachiko poses at Shibuya Station in Tokyo in 1933, already a quiet legend among commuters. For nearly a decade he returned here every day, faithfully waiting for the professor who never came back. A German soldier teaches French children to read German on the blackboard in a village school in Champagne, 1917. For kids who grew up speaking French, the conqueror's language suddenly became a compulsory lesson. Cold War tourism had its own glossy ads. This London storefront coaxed Britons to spend their holidays in the USSR with Intourist and Aeroflot in 1968. Behind the shop window, Soviet posters and brochures quietly sold a carefully curated vision of life on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Former prisoners of a just-liberated camp surround a fallen guard in a moment of chaotic street justice, 1945. In the brief vacuum before formal trials, rage built up over years inside the wire sometimes exploded like this in the open yard. Before 1979, Iranian magazines casually showed women in stylish short dresses, selling everything from films to fashion. Looking at this playful ad now, it feels like a postcard from a vanished, far more liberal Tehran. Bruce Campbell shows off his nightmarishly stretched face makeup on the set of Army of Darkness, early 1990s. The effect mixed prosthetics and old-school camera tricks to warp his features long before CGI made such illusions easy. Blindfolded typists race through a touch-typing contest in Paris, 1940, proving they no longer need to see the keys. The room sounds like a storm of metal hammers as judges listen for mistakes they can't see. Inventor Russell E. Oakes demonstrates his hands-free donut eating machine in the 1930s, guiding the pastry into his mouth with a lever. He designed the gadget so office workers could enjoy coffee and donuts without getting sugar on their fingers. In the late 1950s, farmers tested this robot sow, an automatic feeder that played recorded grunts of a mother pig to call piglets to eat. It's one of the earliest examples of using fake animal sounds and tape loops to hack farm behavior. American boxer Jack Johnson, center in a suit, poses with Finnish policemen and local strongmen during his 1906 visit to Helsinki. 2 years later, he would shock the sports world by becoming the first black world heavyweight boxing champion. A proud line of new postal cars waits behind the Baroque silhouette of the Menshikov Tower in Moscow, 1928. The young Soviet state was racing to mechanize its mail service, replacing horse carts with roaring engines almost overnight. Fidel Castro of Cuba and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi pore over papers during late-night talks in Tripoli, 1977. The two leaders were quietly building a network of alliances that worried diplomats far beyond this small room. Indian workers pose beside the giant cannon Malik-e-Maidan, photographed at Bijapur around 1880. Cast in 1549 and weighing about 55 tons, this lord of the plain once needed elephants and hundreds of buffalo to drag it into place. Members of a Mormon religious group pose in striped prison uniforms after being jailed for practicing plural marriage, United States, 1889. Their crime was having too many wives in an era when the government decided to make an example of them. A whole Greek neighborhood crowds into one wedding portrait in Kastoria around 1900, captured by photographer Leonidas Papazoglou. Even the rooftops and walls are filled with guests trying to squeeze into this single, once-in-a-lifetime family photo. Russian soldiers ride in a cramped triple-decker sleeper car, swaying in canvas bunks as the train rattles along, 1912. Photographer Carl Bulla quietly captured how even rest on the way to maneuvers felt like life on a shelf. On the night of 3 December 1984, a toxic gas leak from the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, spread over nearby neighborhoods, causing thousands of deaths and harming hundreds of thousands more. While survivors marched for justice and demanded the extradition of company chief Warren Anderson on negligence charges. Writer F. Scott Fitzgerald, his wife Zelda, and their daughter Scotty kick in step before a huge Christmas tree in 1925. The bright toys and smiles hide a marriage that would later fall apart, but for this jazz-age moment, the Fitzgeralds look perfectly golden. Scaffolding wraps the Great Sphinx of Giza as workers carefully repair its worn face in 1925. For the first time in centuries, crews cleared the buried body from desert sand, revealing how huge the ancient guardian really is. A rare Harley-Davidson with a sidecar-mounted multi-barrel gun stands ready for tests in the Russian army. Date unknown. It looks more like a machine from a pulp war comic than real-life engineering, but such prototypes were seriously explored. Soviet medics unload a patient from a compact Kamov Ka-18 helicopter onto a waiting stretcher in a grassy field, while their Moskvich ambulance car stands by like a backup lifeline. In the early 1960s, the USSR was quietly testing this tiny coaxial rotor aircraft as a flying rural clinic. Bulgarian freedom fighter Zorka Ilieva poses in full battle gear before trying to enlist in the Russian army at the start of the Russo-Japanese War. Already twice wounded in the Macedonian uprising, this young woman shocked officers in Odessa by riding, shooting, and drilling as calmly as any seasoned soldier. Nearly 90,000 fans packed Boyle's 30 acres in Jersey City in 1921 to watch heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey face French hero Georges Carpentier. The bout became boxing's first million-dollar gate and proved stadium sports could turn into a roaring mass entertainment business. Charles Manson is escorted from the courthouse after receiving his sentence in 1971, surrounded by a wall of deputies. This quiet hallway moment came at the end of a trial that symbolized the dark collapse of the 1960s counterculture dream. Marlon Brando sits in eerie silence among village children on the set of Apocalypse Now in the Philippines, 1977-1978. Behind this calm image, the film's shoot was plagued by storms, illness, and Brando improvising lines because he refused to learn the script. Teenage fans press against a train window, scanning the narrow corridor for a glimpse of drummer Ringo Starr in London, 1964. Within minutes, the carriage would be rattling with screams as Beatlemania crashed through this calm little hallway. A Tibetan mail courier stands on a high plateau road, his letters hidden beneath his robe and a lever-action rifle cradled calmly in his hands. In such remote regions, postmen often trekked for days between monasteries and villages, guarding the mail themselves from bandits and wild animals. Marilyn Monroe and Lauren Bacall dazzle the red carpet at the 1953 premiere of How to Marry a Millionaire in Hollywood. The studio paired these two stars with Betty Grable in one of the earliest CinemaScope romantic comedies, designed to lure audiences back into theaters after television arrived. American swimmer Mark Spitz shows off his trademark mustache and a cascade of Olympic gold medals after his record-breaking 1972 games. A year later, Soviet coaches even asked their swimmers to grow mustaches too, hoping to copy what they thought was his secret hydrodynamic trick. Mud-covered festival-goers slide and tumble for fun as rain turns the Woodstock 1969 field into a giant slippery playground. This wild, muddy chaos became one of the most iconic images of the free-spirited counterculture music festival. A Soviet tractor sledge train crawls into the whiteout during an Antarctic expedition in 1957. These lumbering convoys hauled living quarters, fuel, and science gear hundreds of kilometers from the coast into the frozen interior. A Havana charcoal worker stares into the camera in 1933, his face patterned by years of soot, sun, and hard labor. During the lean Depression years, men like him hauled heavy sacks of charcoal through the streets, fueling the city's kitchens long before gas or electricity reached many homes. Soviet motorcycle scouts ride through the muddy forests near Rzhev, wearing their strange amoeba camouflage suits on the Eastern Front. Their small column mixes American Lend-Lease Indian 741B bikes with a captured German Zundap sidecar, a rolling patchwork of rival industries in one patrol. East German and Soviet soldiers try to understand each other with improvised sign language during joint exercises in the GDR, 1980. Even inside the most rigid Cold War alliance, simple hand gestures sometimes worked better than official translators. German Olympic high jumper Dora Ratjen stands for a police identification photo after officials questioned her sex in 1938. Later investigations suggested Ratjen was intersex and had lived under heavy pressure to compete in women's events. In this unusual relay race, the bicycle is never allowed to stop, so riders leap on and off while it keeps rolling. One wrong move in this moving handoff, and the whole team's race can vanish in a second. Fidel Castro tries to hold back a stubborn bear cub named Baikal, a gift from Siberian geologists during his visit to the USSR in 1963. The little bear later lived in the Moscow Zoo as a furry symbol of Soviet-Cuban friendship. Mendel Bilas is marched under guard through Kiev, accused in a sensational ritual case stirred up by ultra-right circles in the Russian Empire, 1912-1913. After 2 years in prison, a jury cleared him, and the scandalous trial exposed the blood libel myth to the whole world. Women and children hack huge blocks of ice from the frozen river beside the Trek Gornaya manufactory textile mills in Moscow, around 1900. Before refrigerators, city families stored these winter-cut ice blocks in cellars to keep food cool well into summer. A young Soviet soldier, likely a son of the regiment, poses in Prague with 2 local girls in traditional dress in 1945. He proudly carries a captured German MP-40 as the crowd behind them celebrates the city's liberation. A Soviet military artist calmly paints the shattered streets of Berlin from the back of a vehicle in the spring of 1945. While the smoke of battle still hangs over the city, his small canvas quietly turns fresh ruins into a frozen memory of victory. In October 1987, Junior Sergeant Goryachev of the 173rd GRU Special Forces Detachment stands in Afghan clothes and turban before an ambush mission, Mi-24 gunships lined up behind him in Afghanistan. The disguise helped his group blend with local bands in the mountains. An East German traffic policewoman in a white winter cape directs cars with her baton on a cold day. East Berlin, 1960s. Even with traffic lights above her, the rhythm of the city still depended on her precise hand signals. Cuban leader Fidel Castro, age 32, shares a playful moment with 19-year-old Miss Press 1959 Gladys Fayjou at a New York reception in April 1959. As she kisses his cheek, he casually juggles a cigar, a lighter, and what many say was his phone number on a slip of paper. A Parisian worker adjusts the metal bones of a mechanical doll in a toy factory, France, early 1900s. These clockwork children could move and gesture on their own, delighting buyers while quietly pushing the world toward robots and the uncanny valley. A stylish woman in green poses calmly on a quiet street, while West Berlin police confer behind her, pistols on their belts. In the tense Cold War city, even an ordinary stroll could brush against the invisible line between two rival worlds. Soviet soldiers stationed in Potsdam try their luck chatting up passing girls, turning a Cold War posting into a brief summer flirt. For many conscripts in the group of Soviet forces in Germany, stolen moments like this were the only taste of ordinary youth far from home. Marilyn Monroe waits nervously on a studio couch before a small theater audition in Los Angeles, still years away from world fame. In 1950, she was just another hopeful actress at Players Ring, fighting for the bit parts that would soon launch her movie career. Future British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher sits with her husband Dennis and their twins, Mark and Carol, in a rare relaxed family portrait from the early 1960s. A few years later, Mark would be packed off to the elite Harrow boarding school, where the grocer's son met the cold snobbery of Britain's upper-class education. Women from occupied Ukraine are herded into freight cars for transport to German labor sites in the spring of 1943. Many of these civilians were taken far from home to work long hours in farms and factories under strict control. A German policeman shows off his enormous waxed mustache in 1925 when such facial hair was a mark of pride and authority. His stiff tunic, sword, and cap are classic Weimar-era police gear, captured like a living caricature of order and discipline. By 1897, American swordswoman Ella Hatton, known as La Jaguarina, had defeated dozens of men in mounted and foot contests with lance and sword. Billed as the only woman champion of all knightly weapons, she drew crowds eager to see if the armored lady could really beat every challenger. Survivors walk through the shattered heart of San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake and fire, with only a few steel-framed towers still standing in a sea of ruins. Some of those ghostly high-rises were rebuilt and quietly watch over the same streets more than a century later. An elite female bodyguard from Muammar Gaddafi's personal security unit leans against a car in Libya, 1983, calmly holding her pistol. Gaddafi became notorious for his all-female guard corps, rigorously trained and sworn to protect the Libyan ruler. Soviet radar engineer Adolf Tolkachev is captured by KGB officers in 1985, bringing down one of the most damaging espionage cases of the Cold War. For years, he had secretly passed advanced radar and missile data to the CIA, earning millions and the nickname the spy who saved American pilots. In 1950, 15-year-old Sophia Loren stands among fellow contestants at the Miss Italia pageant in a modest swimsuit. She didn't win the main crown, but the judges invented a special Miss Elegance title for her, hinting at the star she would soon become. Albert Einstein takes a rare break from equations for a forest picnic near Oslo in 1920. Even here, surrounded by food and friends, he reportedly kept pulling out his notebook whenever a new idea struck. Flapper-era girls show off faces painted on their knees, a brief fashion craze of the 1920s. As skirts grew shorter, some young women even held little knee contests, turning their legs into tiny comic stage sets. An elderly Tibetan man in Lhasa greets the camera the traditional way by sticking out his tongue, 1955. The custom began as a way to show that one's tongue was a normal color, proving they were not a feared spirit from old stories. Fishermen strained to haul a massive bluefin tuna over the side of their boat in 1985, still treating it as a low-value trash catch. Within a few decades, tuna like this would sell for astonishing sums at Japanese auctions, turning yesterday's discard into oceanic treasure. Jack Daniel, middle row, white hat, sits with the workers of his Tennessee distillery in the early 1900s. Somewhere in this relaxed group is the crew that turned a quiet hometown mash into one of the world's most recognizable bottles. An Afghan intercity bus rumbles along a mountain road in 1970, so packed that passengers ride on the roof with the luggage. For many travelers, this rattling, dust-covered ride was the only link between remote valleys and the outside world. The Russian pre-dreadnought battleship Pobeda thunders down the slipway of the Baltic shipyard into the Neva River, April 1900. Within 5 years, this proud new ship would be fighting for survival in the Russo-Japanese War. World champion Muhammad Ali stands with traditional Iranian strongmen, posing behind a massive ceremonial shield during a national celebration in Iran, 1976. For one afternoon, the biggest star in boxing stepped into a country where ancient-style wrestling, not boxing, was the true national sport. Japanese schoolgirls practice rifle and bayonet drills in a Tokyo middle school yard, 1937. Even teenagers were being quietly woven into the empire's growing wartime discipline. Teenage students at Philadelphia High School for Girls hold a handmade "We Are Everywhere" sign during a 1976 protest. Their small campus rally became one of the early sparks of the gay rights movement, reaching American classrooms. A Union soldier stands with his wife and children outside their tiny tent home near Washington in 1861. Many families actually lived inside Civil War camps, cooking, washing, and raising kids, just a few steps from the marching troops. Marilyn Monroe tries on a new bikini design during a test photo session in the early 1960s. These rare views from all sides were used so designers could see exactly how the swimsuit fit and moved on her body. Two young racketeers stroll past kiosks they protect in St. Petersburg in 1994. In the chaos after the Soviet collapse, such street crews ran their own shadow patrols, collecting cash instead of keeping people safe. These are the battle-worn pilots of the 189th Guards Brest Assault Air Regiment, posing in the ruined hall of the Reichstag in Berlin in May 1945. Decades later, a great-grandson and a modern artist revived this once-faded family photo, turning a half-lost memory into living color. Hare Krishna devotees chant and play cymbals as they walk past a Woolworth department store on London's Oxford Street in the winter of 1970. Their saffron robes and street curtain briefly turned the busy shopping district into a moving temple. Soviet actor Yevgeny Leonov rehearses inside the cage set with trained tigers while filming the comedy Stripe Trip in the early 1960s. Many of the film's chaotic shipboard scenes were done with real circus animals, turning the shoot itself into a risky adventure. A young Vietnamese guerrilla fighter carries her rifle and gear at the very start of the Vietnam War, 1961. Many such women served as scouts and partisans, moving through the jungle almost unnoticed. At 15, future Lithuanian President Dalia Grybauskaitė is captured shoveling cement on a construction site in the Soviet Union, 1971. Few imagined this summer worker in rubber boots would one day lead her country into the European Union and NATO. The only known photograph of Chief Seattle, the Suquamish and Duwamish leader, taken around 1864 in what is now Washington State. Decades later, a booming city would quietly take his name, turning this reserved elder into the hidden face behind Seattle. Sir Thomas Lipton, the Scottish grocer turned magnate, whose Lipton brand made affordable packaged tea a global habit by the late 19th century. He didn't invent the tea bag, but his marketing tricks and ready-packed blends quietly rewired how millions brewed their daily cup. French stylist Marcel Gratteau demonstrates his famous Marcel wave, created with heated irons that sculpted stiff Victorian hair into soft, flowing ridges. By the early 1900s, this risky hot metal technique was so desired that women endured burns and singed hair just to leave the salon with his signature waves. Masked Australian nurses and drivers line up with SOS signs and early ambulances in Sydney, April 1919. During the Spanish flu wave, they raced through the dusty streets to reach patients while trying not to fall ill themselves. Beaming with pride, the newly crowned Miss Nairobi 1966 poses in her patterned dress and sash outside a simple concrete wall. Just a few years after Kenya's independence, local beauty contests like this became joyful celebrations of new national identity and style. On an Indian beach at Alang in 1996, workers cut apart the once proud Soviet research ships academic Sergei Korolev and cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, sold for scrap by newly independent Ukraine. The vessels that had listened to space missions now died quietly to the hiss of torches and the crash of steel on the shore. On the 4th of June 1917, young New Yorkers lined up to sign the brand new U.S. draft cards as America rushed into the First World War. Some came proudly in their best suits. Others quietly wondered if this pen stroke would change their lives forever. During the 1918 influenza pandemic, worshippers in San Francisco packed the church steps shoulder to shoulder for a public prayer service. Ironically, the city was closing theaters and mandating masks at the same time, yet gatherings like this quietly kept the virus moving through the crowd. A lone portrait of East German leader Erich Honecker stands in front of endless prefab apartment towers in East Berlin, 1980s. The tiny framed face against the concrete giants shows how life in the GDR was surrounded by distant party symbols more than personal comfort. Marilyn Monroe poses in a playful two-piece beside a sculpted head in a Hollywood home, early 1950s. Even off-set, she was already shaping her legend, turning private rooms into her own bright stage. Legendary Soviet border guard Nikita Karatsupa poses on patrol with his loyal dog, who helped him track intruders along the frontier. Together, they reportedly captured or stopped 467 illegal border crossers without losing control of their line. A Chinese attendant stands beside a toppled bronze ritual cauldron at the Ming Dynasty tombs, China, 1874. Many such giant vessels were cracked or looted in the 19th century, leaving these royal graves scattered with monumental relics. Queen Elizabeth II feeds her beloved corgis in the Balmoral Castle kitchen, Scotland, 1976. Over her life, she kept more than 30 corgis, all descended from her first dog Susan, and even given their own royal menu.